Right. All right. So once you're hopefully sitting with the person next to you, and we want you to share a saying, something in Spanish we call it dicho, right? So a saying that's unique to you, that you like, that you identify with. Share it with the person next to you, and that way you get to say hello to the person next to you, and we'll bring that back later on. And so we'll connect that. So we'll give you just 1 minute.
Yeah, as an example, like I was telling her before when I was really cold in this room, I was like, and I couldn't think of like the word to use in English, and so I was like, I'm really like friolenta, which is the word in Spanish to me that means you get cold easily, but it actually translates literally to slow and cold. So it's very, so try to have a conversation with the person next to you about a phrase in a language. Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a specific language, it also be a cultural thing.
Yeah.
Right? So my surfer friends like to say butters. Yeah. Everything's really butters, which means smooth. Right? And so any saying that you like, it could be anything. Go for it. Person next to you.
Or bless your heart.
All right. So if I can have your attention back and you can wrap up your conversations, we'll get you going with other stuff.
Thank you. The reason why we had you do this is because language is how we understand the world, right? Language is how we understand the CS classroom. If we're students in a CS classroom, we live our lives through the languages that we know and our experience with language. And we know that as computer science is rolled out to all the students in our system, a lot of students come in with diverse language backgrounds. So these are students who might speak languages at home that are different from those they're learning at school. And we want to think about these students not as necessarily how do we differentiate for them and the challenges they face. We want to think about their bilingualism as a resource in our classroom and really leveraging what they know and the assets they bring to the CS classroom to push our pedagogy in perhaps a different direction. So we're going to use a term which you're going to see a lot today on the next slide. The term is here, translanguaging, and we'll talk about what that means in more depth, but that's basically what bilinguals do and how that can inspire our approach to teaching all students computational practices. So to kind of get us kicked off in thinking about this population, I want to get a little bit, I guess, into policy. So take a look at the next slide. We have a whole bunch of terms that are used to describe this population that I've just sort of outlined for you, right? How many of you have seen words like these? Okay, so just talk for a second in between your table group, the people next to you. What do these terms say about our students? Why use one over another? And where have you seen these before? So just have a quick conversation in your group. What do these terms say about our students? All right, so why don't we come back with just a couple seconds to process these terms. So let's go through them. When you think limited English proficient, what does that say about our students?
That they're limited.
Okay, that they're limited,
Yeah,
right? What kind of connotation does that have?
It's a value judgment.
That they're not doing good, that there's something wrong.
There's something wrong. There's some sort of deficit.
It's also using a non-person noun, like a limited English proficient, like it's depersonalized.
Okay, so depersonalized, kind of negative. Okay, what about this one, the English language learners / English learners? Where do we see that, and what do we think about that one?
You see that in schools. It's nice to know that it's just acknowledging that someone's learning a language. It's not always with the most positive semantics, but what
Aren't all kids learning English though?
Yeah.
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 It says they're learning.
Okay, so it says they're learning English. It's a way, it's more positive than limited English proficient. It says they're learning. It helps us make that designation. But there's a question here, right? Aren't all kids sort of learning English?
And so we were talking, and I'm trying to encourage everyone to understand that if someone has an accent, it means they know some other language fluently. So potentially that implies that English isn't the first language, it's an additional language.
Right. However, the term itself does not acknowledge that other language in the term, right? Okay, then this one, culturally linguistically diverse students. Any thoughts? To me, that one's just kind of clunky. It's interesting, but like, could you imagine going around saying like, oh, all our culturally linguistic is diverse?
CLDS.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. Also, all children are culturally and linguistically. We sort of have that right challenge there. We also have English as a second language students, which labels the students with a program. It's not ideal.
Also, some of them speak more than 2 languages, so.
Yeah.
Right. What about those students who are sort of multilingual? Then we have children with English language communication barriers, similar to that first one, perhaps. Language minority students. What about this one?
I don't like that at all.
Yeah.
Because like in the neighborhoods I teach in, they're not in the minority, they're in the majority, you know?
Great point. And then this last one, emergent bilinguals. Thoughts on that one?
I haven't heard that before. I mean, before today.
No.
I think because there is this thing of using that phrase to only on some kids, right? Versus every kid.
Right.
And just making this where you're different.
Right. So I think the reason why we tend to put a label on these students is because our system needs to in some way acknowledge that they're there. There was a policy many years ago that happened in, I think it was 2001, No Child Left Behind, where they started actually counting these students because they were falling through the cracks. So I think there's an acknowledgement that some term is needed. We don't want to pigeonhole them, but at the same time, we do want a term. And so just to tell you, which one do you think No Child Left Behind uses? Used No Child Left Behind, past tense, now.
ESL.
So no Child Left Behind used LEP, the first one. No Child Left Behind called these students limited English proficient. What about the new federal legislation? What do you think is used now?
CLDS.
No. English language learners, which is something that New York City and New York State caught on to in like the 90s. So really the federal government has just caught up to where we were in 1990.
Right.
New York State now uses emergent bilinguals. New York State. New York City uses L still, but New York State is starting to use emergent bilinguals. And the recognition here is really that our students, as they have their home languages and the languages they speak, they're becoming bilingual in school when they learn English. We're kind of recognizing them for the whole people they are. Some of you might ask, what about those who are learning multiple languages? Why not multilinguals? I think it's a political statement because this word is slowly disappearing from policy as it becomes sort of a flashpoint. And so this is said to kind of connect us to the history of bilingual education that we've had. So it's sort of a term that I work for the CUNY New York State Initiative on Emergent Bilinguals. It's a very purposeful recognition of what these students bring. So I'm going to use that term.
Right. I was,
today.
so I was born in Mexico City, and I grew up here in San Diego, and none of these were around, and I was actually put in a special ed, which is really awkward for everyone, right? And so it's really interesting to see this growth. You know, part of it is like, yeah, you want resources in buckets, right? And if there is no bucket, then you just the nearest bucket.
Yeah.
Exactly, right? So the reason why I use emergent bilinguals is because it really keeps in our minds that bilingualism can be a resource in our classroom. It's not just, how are these kids going to learn English? But like the fact that, oh wow, they're coming in with these other languages. How do we deal with that? How do we use that? How do we think about it? And I always think about Alex, who was a student in an after-school program that I led, who was an emergent bilingual student, who was also using code to express himself, also using artistic work to express himself. And so I think emergent bilingual captures all of that and thinking about the different modes that students use. So just to kind of think about the progression of this, we used to think that bilingualism was sort of a problem, right? The kid comes in speaking some language like this unicycle, and then slowly over time we replace it with another unicycle. If anybody has, for example, my dad who spoke Yiddish and like Hebrew at home, but then over time that kind of is now dormant in his mind. He doesn't use that language that much. And then the next model we had for a while was this language as a privilege thing. So think about your foreign language class in high school. You come in with this unicycle, you add this other like perfectly balanced wheel, and then you have a bicycle. And wow, you can speak in English and Spanish, and you can do both so well at the same rate and talk about the same things. And we think when we think about additive bilingualism, that's often associated with the elite. Like, oh, just add this other language on because it'll help you in the global economy or something. But now we think about dynamic bilingualism, the fact that we use languages for different purposes in different contexts to do different things. So think of it like the ATV, right? You're driving along on a road which is uneven, and the wheels will move at different rates and at different speeds in order to just have you navigate that terrain. So sometimes you need English, sometimes you need some Spanish, sometimes you need to translanguage. You need to move across those languages so that you can express the point better. And I know Joliz was going to talk a little bit about her experience using language dynamically.
Yes, indeed. Is this still you?
Oh, yeah. The one just before, sorry.
Oh. So we're going to be talking, I was going to get to it during
your
the
experience.
Yes.
With the, I guess Joliz was telling me on the phone the other day that she tends to use languages at different rates.
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm a big fan of code switching, which is the idea of there's different contexts for different situations in which you use language. There's your professional tone. There's the tone you use at home. There's the language you use at home. In my home, it's Spanish. And for when you're talking with students specifically, there are different ways to engage them in which those different different code switching can attest for. So as a kid from the Bronx, I have a really easy time getting to know some of my students because we have those same touch points of being able to talk about like the bodega around the corner and getting an icy from the lady down the street, or talking about or if I'm in a classroom and I have a kid who's acting out a bit, if I bring out my Spanish, suddenly they think that I'm their mother and they sit up a bit straighter because they have that connection immediately. So it's about being able to use language in a way as a resource in the classroom that could be about multiple language, but it's also about your tonality and different cultural touch points.
Great.
Yeah.
And what Joliz is doing in all those situations is she's translanguaging. So she's using her full linguistic repertoire to make sense of what's happening. So she doesn't necessarily stifle her Spanish. She doesn't necessarily stifle her English. She is allowed to use those languages fluidly to figure out what's going on in a classroom. And bilinguals do this all the time. I go into kindergarten classrooms where and the kindergarten is the best place to see it because they haven't learned to suppress yet. And they'll be like mixing colors, and I was at a school in Chinatown. Kids were talking about the colors in English and then all of a sudden Chinese, and they would talk to their friend who spoke Chinese and talk Chinese, and then the kid who talks English, and it was just a perfect fluidity because that's how they were making meaning. So we want to think about that's what bilinguals do. How do we bring that into our CS classroom? So we're going to take a visit to Claremont.
So I want to talk about this specific classroom that we worked in, which we had multiple types of learning going on at once, and it was a road to get there. So just a little background. Our program, I work with ScriptEd, and we have software developers volunteer to teach coding in our classrooms. We were placed at Claremont International, which is a school in which, for the most part, students have been in the country less than 3 years. So languages vary. Students come from all places. For our classroom in particular, the students were Spanish speakers, French speakers, and Bengali speakers. So let's talk about how that worked out in our classroom. So my role in the classroom as program manager is I'm kind of a coach for the volunteer teachers. I teach them how to teach, and I observe the class, give them feedback. So this was actually the first day of class. Students are facing the front. It's a very traditional setting. And one of the first things we do is we want to show kids like how awesome coding can be, and we ask them to inspect the element of a web page and be able to manipulate that so that it says their name instead of Google, or you change the heading on a New York Times page to be about your friend. So up front, Kirill, one of our volunteers, he's like, all right, everyone, great. Open up your laptops, bring up Google, right-click, and let's see what it looks like. So I'm sitting in the back watching as all the kids pull up their laptops, pull up Google, right-click. The student looks to his left, looks to his right. His friends look a little confused. He right-clicks, hits search, and sits up really, really proud of himself because he got the work done. All his friends copy along because they're like, oh, okay, that's what we're supposed to do. Kirill comes around, and he looks at the screens, and he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I should have explained. Click means like, when you're clicking something. They're like, and the kid turns and goes, I know what the word click is. You told me to right click. So I looked it up. And what turns out is because we're not thinking about the context when we're talking to students. We have to be very specific in how we're talking when we're trying to teach a lesson to students who are multilingual, who are learning English in the classroom. So there's a lot going on that happened over the year. First off, our volunteers are not trained teachers. They're software developers who are volunteering their time and really excited to work with students, but they don't understand how different pedagogy works with young people. 2, programming is written in English. When you are coding, all the syntax is in English, and you have to describe that to students when you don't know the language, and that doesn't translate in this other language. One, we were a before school class. We were at 8 in the morning, and so what happened was, because we weren't connecting with the students, they were dropping in mass, and we had to figure out how to make sure that this was a classroom where students can get a lot out of it. So what happened is, over the winter, things started changing around naturally. We didn't particularly plan this, but it happened this way. We started doing small learning groups that kind of segregated themselves based on language. And each of those groups, even though they were segregated by language, had kind of a different learning style going through them. So I'm going to talk about what those different learning styles were right now. So the first one is, we have our volunteer Alex, who thankfully happened to be fluent in French. And a lot of our students from West Africa are French-speaking students. So this is our student Geneva, and she came in. First off, she did not speak, period, because I don't think she felt comfortable with us. And a lot of times, it's about building trust with students. And it's not necessarily that they don't know English or that they don't understand it. It's that they don't feel comfortable speaking it because they haven't mastered it. So in this situation, there was a group of students who spoke French, and they essentially learned how to code in French because Alex had that training, had that background. What was really fascinating is that it wasn't just that she was learning more English and learning how to code and being able to do all the work, but she was actually getting more technical skills in French because she was expanding her French vocabulary by learning how to code. Because I went to school in Puerto Rico until 3rd grade. I can't tell you how to translate things like Boolean and technical terms in Spanish. I never learned them. Whereas in this case, she was able to do that in her classroom. So the second group, and this is the group that I was a part of, which was the Spanish speakers, in that we are figuring this out together. I'm not a programmer. My volunteers are awesome programmers. I can do some code, but I can't get away with a lot of the stuff that students are learning in class. By me being the adult in the space who also was in the same, I'm not sure quite what's going on and I don't understand this, the students felt this ability to, it's okay to fail. It's okay to be wrong because even our teacher is trying to figure this out with us. So they felt strong enough to break code, to try and experiment with things. They didn't feel this need of I can't give this answer because it's wrong. And that's oftentimes there's a fear with students where they don't want to be incorrect. And by me being there I don't get this either, let's figure this out together, it gave them this opportunity to be able to just really play and create things. And the last one was our group, we had a group of students from Bangladesh, and it was that we would work with certain students who had more English proficiency and were able to understand what we were working with, and they would translate to their fellow students. So here we have Ujal and Marina. And what they would do is they would come in and they would do their best to teach the material to their fellow students. What was really interesting about this was, like I said, our class was at 8 in the morning. We were lucky if we ever saw Ujal before 8:45. And then when he realized that he was a resource in the classroom, and he realized that we counted on him, he was always there super early because he wanted to make sure he was there for his friends. And then what was really cool was obviously, in classes you have exit tickets to check on the understanding of students. The next day he would come and he would ask, so how many of them got it right? Because he knew if they got it right, that means he did a good job. And he got really excited by the fact that he was the one teaching. So these were the 3 different ways that in our classroom we were able to why is this not going forward? We were able to have students still learn the material, but using their different types of learning styles, their different types of languages to be able to understand the material. And the big thing is our volunteers brought in the idea of a Scrum. In tech companies, they have Scrums all the time, in which it's a time where people check in and talk about like where their project is right now, what they're working on, what's holding them back. These are daily or weekly, depending on your company. So we had this in our classroom too, where it was a time where there was no technology, and we just talked about like, where are you right now? What are you getting stuck on? What can we help you with? And it was a time for us to like really get to know each other. So it's really about making sure that, you know, we're developing relationships with these students, because I always think that you don't learn from people you don't like. So if the student feels that you care about them and that you're genuinely interested in them learning, that they are more willing to work together, using all the resources they have, so that we all can move forward.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
In what languages or language would these meetings take place?
Generally English, because aside from Alex and myself, the other volunteers spoke English. Well, except for Kirill, who spoke Russian, but no one else spoke Russian in the room.
Did the kids speak in their languages and need translation sometimes?
Sometimes. And when that happened, you know, we just allowed for it to happen. We felt what was great is that we all learned about each other's cultures and language, and were able to learn phrases from each other. And students just in general, because the idea of code switching, in which you know how to navigate through either school systems or homes, or being one way when you're in one space and another, they knew how to navigate between the coding languages. I think because of that, they understood, like, I know earlier they were talking about like, well, you think Code Academy is JavaScript when it really isn't. Students understood that there's a big difference between what you're working with and what platform it's on. And I think part of that was because they understand the need for using it in different contexts. So those were our kids, and you know, even though the class got smaller as we got big, we were really successful. The students by the end of the year participated in hackathons and did even and placed higher than some of the other schools that we were in, and they just felt really proud of themselves. So that is our group at Claremont International.
Thank you. So really the key here is fluidity, right? That the students are using multiple languages to make sense of what's happening in the class, whether that's talking to their peers in one language, but then talking to the volunteers in another.
The mic.
Oh, sorry. And using their peers as resources to do their projects.
All right, so one of the things we'll talk about is do a little exercise in how do we transition from one language to the next. In the previous talk, there was a lot of programming language, right? And we were talking about how that's a lot of languages. How do you get through them, right? And so a little bit what we're talking about today is how do we use either previous analogical representations, as well as how do we transition across programming language, right? So I want to give you a little bit of time to think about that. How do you transition across programming languages to yourself? And then if you want to take that a step further, what resources do you use that students bring? What resources do you use to help you transition? So I'll give you just 1 minute to think about, and then we'll talk a little bit about approach. Okay, so we're going to make this a little bit more explicit. I have some code up here. It's a couple Scratch blocks. And how would you translate this Scratch code into a syntax-based programming language, Python? So I want you to actually give that a try right now. If you want to write it out, if you want to type it out, I'll give you, I'm not going to give you that much time. I'm just going to give you about a minute or two. And then we're going to talk about perhaps what that looks like, and specifically pay attention to your strategies. So I'll give you a minute. Go for it. All right, so I'm not going to ask you for the code. What I'm going to ask you is tell me about some of those strategies, tools you use to translate that code over.
Well, a lot of these things are like
somewhat Scratch specific.
Okay.
Like, move 10 steps. So I thought about, okay, what module would I be using if I were doing this in another language, and decided on Turtle Python. And then it was a translation from what does this mean in Scratch to what does this mean in Turtle Python.
Okay. Any other strategies, tools used? What was the trickiest part about this code translating that over? Anyone have a specific challenge? No.
Did anybody work with a buddy at all? Oh,
No?
interesting.
Okay.
Brave.
No? Any strategies? So imagine your students are attempting this, right? And so these are students who are either newcomers in a different to a new country, to a new language. And also think about as a CS professional, right? A CS professional is constantly asked to explore new languages, right? New APIs. How do you approach that, right? How do you, if you're a CS professional, if you're learning a new API, how would you do that?
I go right for the terms that I recognize. So
Okay.
I'm looking for those if-elses. I'm looking for while, and say, okay, how is this language doing it?
So what is familiar, right?
Yeah, just looking for whatever terminology that makes sense to me.
Okay. And okay. Any other thoughts? Any other ideas as a CS professional?
Well, you asked like, how do you approach a new language as a professional? And like generally, it's like you have a specific small project that's of like sufficient complexity that you've built 1,000 times, and then you build it in a new language. That's how.
So you're using your experience in the past?
Yeah, like I always build tic-tac-toe.
Okay.
I always build tic-tac-toe.
Okay. Oh, cool. So you find something, a project you've done in the past that you're familiar with, and then see how that looks like in a new language,
Yep.
right? Okay. Great. And so great. So there's all great strategies. We're going to cover, go into how to use translanguagism as an approach for this. Before I ask you that, is why translate? Why a new language? What's the need for that?
New platform.
But why a new platform?
Because it's, because the Swift came out, or your company needs to have a new Android, or you're tired of writing VB and you want to move to new hotness.
Okay. New hotness, right? So there's trends, perhaps?
I saw a hand over here.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a legitimately better way to do something that you're looking for, and you don't necessarily always know that until you've tried other possibilities.
Yeah, and so each language is probably gonna have a limit, right, of what it can do. I can't do GPS with Scratch, right? But just like we use various languages with people to understand what we mean, computer programmers write code in the best language for that expression, right? So I may need touch screens, and that's not gonna be possible in probably a Flash environment, right? We're getting a lot of VR, AR right now, and so that's possible in some languages, not possible in other languages, right? And so languages are an opportunity to express yourself in a new way, right? That you couldn't do in perhaps a different language. And so for bilingual students, that's something that's happening quite a bit, right? I need to be able to express myself in a new language, and that before I could not do. And so that's perhaps either the person is perhaps one reason is perhaps a person can't understand what it is that I'm saying, and so I need to be able to express myself, right? But we also have dichos or sayings, right? And so this kind of gets a little bit more complicated when we want to do when we want to switch across programming languages, right? And so this is an activity that I work with students on, and introducing new languages. And so that and it poses a little bit of a challenge, and it poses a little bit of why or the need, right? So we'll start off with a saying. And so there's a saying in as I said earlier, when I moved to San Diego growing up, I started learning English, and I quickly realized that some things don't translate over exactly, and people give you some really weird stares, right, when you say those things, and vice versa, right? Sometimes sayings like, well, what did you really mean by that? And so you kind of have to wait it out. You kind of have to use body language, like okay, and then wait for that meaning, and so that takes a little bit of time, unless you're just really expressively you can say, what do you mean, you know, but that kind of messes up the flow of the conversation. So it's a lot of, I think, code switching within language, but also code switching within, not with body languages as well, right? And so, and expression, and so I'll give you another example of that. So one familiar saying in Spanish is ponte las pilas or poner las pilas. Has anybody ever heard that? Yeah? Poner las pilas. So we had a hand up in the back. Poner las pilas, what is, let's go ahead and we'll start off by deconstructing that. And we use translanguage to make meaning. In the back, what does that mean? Poner las pilas.
Sort of awake or get on with it or
get on with it?
What does it literally mean? Like if you were to like
put your batteries on.
What was that?
Put your batteries on.
Put your batteries on. And so for, if I were to tell you put your batteries on, and you're a human being, let's assume that, how's that gonna sound to you?
As an English speaker.
As an English speaker.
I'm like, all right, let's get going.
Right, and so you're able to, right, and so that's, and you're able to, and how did you get that to that?
I don't know, a lot of pop culture.
Pop culture?
Because batteries is associated with energy.
Yeah, Energizer Bunny.
Right,
And the
Energizer Bunny, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and so put your batteries on really doesn't mean anything, right, until we're able to add that contextual over, right? And so we're able to reconstruct that in another language, right? So that means get going. I think in the back, what did you say?
Or having energies, he said.
Having energy.
Right.
Right, so have energy. So we said battery is associated with energy. We also said like Energizer Bunny, right? Was another piece. Having energy, right? But if I told you have energy or be an Energizer Bunny, that's probably not really going to mean anything, right? Unless you've watched a lot of commercials, right? And so, what is one way that we say that we would say that in English? A saying that we would say that. What's the saying for ponte las pilas in Spanish? Put your batteries on, having energy. What would that mean?
Seize the day.
Seize the day. Any other?
Like, let's get a move on.
Let's get a move on.
Let's get a move on, right?
Which is kind of a weird phrase in itself.
Yeah.
That's good, yeah, right? But we knew exactly what that meant, right? Let's get a move on.
Imagine trying to
Better
go.
wake up. Kind of thing.
Better
Wake up. Better wake up.
Imagine trying to take "let's get a move on" back to Spanish.
Yeah.
Right? And so
Vamos a conseguir una mudanza.
Movimiento, right? And so this is what happens a lot when you speak two languages, right? You speak multiple languages, right? You start off with one saying that's not familiar with you, and you're able to deconstruct that, right, to its meaning, to make some sort of meaning, to get at the heart of that. You reconstruct that in another language, you realize this is not still working, and then you do that little polishing and finessing, and you take ownership in order to make it work, right? Another would be like, it's cracking, you know, get cracking, you know? And all of these carry a lot of contextual, a lot of cultural kind of background to them, right? Which we may say that right now, maybe that works in New York, but if you go to the Midwest, right, it may be a bit different, right? And so it's also your geographical location, your friends around you, your peers, right? And so and so this activity, what we're doing is remixing dichos. And so we're introducing the concept of reusing and remixing, which is a very important practice, a computational practice.
What's dichos?
Dichos means saying.
Saying. Oh, okay.
So we're remixing saying. Thank you for that. And so just like when we're programming, we're constantly building on the work that others have done, right? And we are borrowing from that work. And sometimes that we can't just copy code over, right? We have to be able to finesse that, right? And so so this activity talks about how that computational practice that you're doing in going from Spanish to that practice from Spanish to English actually applies in programming as well, right? And so we'll get into that in a bit. One of the things I wanted to show you are other familiar sayings. So we heard some in the beginning, right? And so, por si las moscas, it's a really weird one that literally translate into for if the flies, and which is like, what is that for if the flies? I think, you know, and so this is kind of like just in case. So, por si las moscas, just in case, take a jacket. You know, por si las moscas. That was a common saying, right? And so that's one way in which we take ownership. But we have a bunch of others. And so, poner las pilas, what we did, ¿qué onda? Onda means wave. What's wave? Weird one. Estrenar, which means to wear something for the first time. Te quiero is actually one of my favorite ones because it's not like, and it's not love. You know, and you don't say in Spanish love is amo, right? And you don't tell your mom te amo, you tell her te quiero, right? And you don't tell your mom to like you. Weird, right? It's te quiero, right? And so it's so fascinating that just culturally you create this space in between, right, for a different type of emotion or love, right? And hablar hasta por los codos is another one, right? And so we're asking you earlier to look at your own sayings, right? Look at what it is you. We all have cultural sayings. We all have sayings that we speak with our friends, right? And those carry certain connotations. And so this is an example of how in language we do a little bit of that deconstructing, reconstructing, and taking ownership to make sense of the world around us, but also to participate in it, right? Because if I get stuck in this case, I'm not going to be able to really participate, right? Part of that really is about taking ownership over one's work. So what we're going to do is on this activity is going to remix a stack from Scratch to Python. And we're going to start off with something up here, right? And very similar to what we had done before is you talked a little bit about your strategies, right? So how can we use this same model of making meaning and sense of sayings? How do we use that for making meaning and sense with code, with programming, right? And so how do we, and part of this is making certain concepts and practices explicit from one language to the next, right? And so we'll start off with this Scratch block. And let's start off by just deconstructing it, right? So what is this trying to say? What is this Scratch block up here doing?
It's handling a click event.
Okay, and so walk me through it. So handling a click event, and how is it doing it? What's happening?
It's going to a specific location on the screen.
Specific location, and then?
And then it's doing the say event, whatever that means.
That's fine. So it's saying something, right?
Yeah.
And then?
And then it's
Here,
hiding.
say something and then disappear.
And then it disappears. And then we also have one up here, where we're. Is that right?
Two piece. You got it.
Yeah.
All right. And so let's. So what we do. So this is the meaning, right? And this is when we introduce the concept of an algorithm, right? An algorithm is just a way of saying a kind of like a conceptual, the whole meaning of things, right? And I'm trying to get the word to students. So it's really the meaning, pulling out what we're really trying to get to without getting down to the specifics, right? Let's take that a bit further, and now we'll do a little bit of what's called pseudocode, right? So we're going to reconstruct that in Python, right? And so for Python folks, how do we handle that click event?
It depends on what framework you're using. That's what she was talking about. Right?
Yeah.
I just want to say on click.
On click. All right. What's next? Specific location on screen. Here's coasters, right?
Glide to, or what? Glide to?
Object.
What would you say?
Object go to, object glide to.
Go to?
X, yeah. Go to X, comma Y.
So it's right there, right?
Yeah.
And we said X.
Oh yeah, well, negative, yeah.
Increments, yeah.
And negative 40 Y or 0.
Negative 40, 0. All right. And now appearing. I'll give it to him. Show.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
All right.
Object, object, or, yeah, object or.
show. All right. And now say something. How do we say stuff in Python? Print. And click on. All right. And disappear. Object hide, right? Right, so now we have our pseudocode, which is a little bit more specific than algorithm, right? And we have a little bit of that code being weaved in. And so the last piece is taking ownership, right? Well, if I run this through Coasters, whatever program, whatever my compiler is, whatever my ID is, like, will it work? No. And so this is kind of similar to Dichos, right? If I were to translate this over and perhaps saying it in that language, it's not really going to work, right? I have to do some more massaging and polishing up, right? And so that's that making it compilable. That's that taking ownership. All right. And so that comes in this piece, where now we go into, we may need to know a little bit more information about the cultural aspect. We may need a little bit more information about the specific ID, or we're using Python or Turtle, right? Or whatever that environment is. And so that's specific to that culture, right? And that's very similar to saying ponte las pilas in New York versus perhaps in another part of the world, right? That may also speak English. All right, so that's that piece. I'm going to hold off on that piece, and I'm going to skip through, because that takes time. That's fine. We'll make that work, and that's going to be specific. And so one of the things that my engineering professor used to say is that scientists memorize things, engineers know how to derive them. Right? And I thought that was just always fascinating. He's like, don't memorize anything, don't remember anything, just know how to derive it, know how to get to it, right? And I feel like that's a lot of what's happening here, is I'm not telling you the specific, eventually we'll figure out the specific code of that, know the meaning of it, know how to take ownership of that and derive that, right? There's going to be kids who are going to go through every single block in Scratch or Codesters and click on it and try to memorize it, right? They're trying to engage with it, but that's probably 1 or 2 kids, right? And that takes a lot of work, and that's really boring sometimes. Well, it depends if that's what you like, right? And so what I really want you to do is know where to start, know where to go, how to be able to use your practices to be able to get to that, right? And so one of the practices that we're highlighting here is reusing and remixing, right? As well as testing and debugging, which is that last piece on making it familiar, right? And so,
great. So Francisco's example, I think, is really unique because it really does draw on the language backgrounds of the students to make a very specific computational connection. But we really believe that there are all kinds of things that students know about, whether it's their language, whether it's from their cultures, whether it's from the things they do as hobbies or interests of theirs, that can be connected to computational practices. So this idea of translanguaging, moving between languages to make sense of the world, in the way Francisco did with his Dichos activity, we can also think of that as a lens through which to view other lessons or activities we might do with students. So what you're going to do in this next activity, you're going to get with the people at your table, and we're going to give each table a different computational practice. So we have reusing and remixing, we have abstracting and modularizing, we have testing and debugging, and then we have experimenting and iterating. And it's going to be your job to come up with an activity that draws on something the students know about, whether that's their language, their culture, their interests. But language would be great, but we also know not everyone here is bilingual or knows about the languages of their students. So go with something the students know about, familiar with, or part of their culture. And you're going to design an activity that connects that practice to that aspect of their lives. So just as an example, another quick one. Experimenting and iterating, which includes trying things out as you go. I think about students who might be interested in cooking. They add spices and then they test it. So how might I design an activity that makes that link? Or remixing and reusing. So giving credit to people whose work you build on. There's an example of that when rappers shout out people in their videos of giving credit. So how do we do that in our commenting or in our Scratch projects? So think about the computational practice, make a connection to your students' lives, and you're going to come up with an activity. So we have different ones for each table. Does any table have a certain preference for one that they would like? Anyone really want to do remixing or really want to do debugging or?
You'll pick whichever. And then part of what's happening here is we're using computational practices as a bridge across programming languages.
Right.
And we're pulling from translanguaging concepts, right? And part of that is to know that just like you were reusing and remixing in Scratch, we're doing that in another language. It's going to be a bit different, right? The nuance is going to be different, but we're still going to pull from those same resources.
And you do it in your life. You do it when you speak language. You do it when you are playing sports. You do it when you are, right.
So we have a bunch of practices. We'll pass them around. You get to look at part of where these practices and strategies come from are from Scratched's computational thinking framework. And so think of the practices as kind of having some mind things that happen, and then think of the strategies that are very specific. And so you can use the strategies to make it a little bit more clear. So we'll give you a couple times.
Yeah, probably about 10 minutes or so. Does every table at least have a germ of an idea to share out? Okay.
Okay. So before.
Go for it. Do you want to tell us about it?
Sure. So we want to talk about it's not just about speaking different languages. It's also about being able to articulate things that students really enjoy, and be able to apply those concepts into what you're trying to teach. So this is one of my favorite moments recently in education. This is from another teacher who posted. This is from an extra credit question about asking their students to explain electronegativity, and the student very confidently responded that electronegativity is like Trey Songz. Trey has no chill. He's a killer. He's a savage. He steals your girl. Just like in electronegativity, that it's a concept that has a lot of Trey-like behavior. It's the ability of an atom to take another atom's electron, with fluorine being the OG. So the student was able to connect this concept to something completely that's related to them and what their knowledge is, and they're able to connect those two together.
And you notice they're also translanguaging here.
Yeah.
They're going across different kinds of registers and different kinds of language to make their point.
Killer, savage.
Yes.
Right. Straight killing them.
No chill.
But then electron, fluorine, electronegativity.
Yep.
So the idea that students need all of their linguistic repertoires to make meaning in situations. If we just tell them all you can use are the words fluorine, electron, and electronegativity, we wouldn't have gotten this powerful connection.
Exactly.
And I think that really is in a nutshell what we're trying to get at here with the connections between translanguaging and computer science. So go ahead.
One thing that I is that part of the we were having a previous conversation earlier about understanding a concept and then being able to apply it to other. And I think this kind of hits at being able to understand a concept, right, and seeing how the meaning of it can be applied in another scenario to just create this analogy, right? This creates a sort of analogical representation of one and the other, and bring it across as that concept, right? And so it's I think an interesting explanation, but it's also interesting how to be able to realize that programming is not something that just happens in front of a computer, right? And those practices are not something they're just doing, but we're able to extract those and apply those in other cases, in other scenarios. And that's really, I think it's very powerful in the sense that we have a certain set of tools that now we're walking into, right? That no longer live inside a screen, right? But it's something that we can apply when we're describing, when we want to express ourselves to someone else.
Great. Is there a table that wants to go first and tell us about their activity? I heard a lot of great ones going around. In the back.
Sure. Ours doesn't have Scratch or Python.
That's okay. We're getting there.
Our first activity, our book, is with emojis.
What's your concept?
So our concept is testing and debugging. So for students to debug first, so partner 1 translates a sentence that I give them into emoji. Partner 2 takes that emoji, just the emoji, and translates it into a sentence, and then they meet and talk about, so it's telephone, not emoji. Right? And if there were any inconsistencies in their translations, then they get a different solution that they present out to the class. And we see if their debugging as a partner pair has made it any clearer.
Awesome.
Great. And I love including emojis as language, because they are.
Yeah.
Over here.
So we did not go with language, we went with dance. We have students in small groups so that they can choose dances that they are familiar with. So each group chooses a dance that the members are culturally familiar with, and they list out dance moves, like names of moves. In Scratch, they can create a my block for each move and put them in different orders. In Python, they could write a function for each move and call them in different orders.
Nice. Great example.
That's great, and that's for modularizing and abstracting, right? So that makes total
For
sense.
sure.
Then we have this group over here.
All right, we didn't get that quite that far, but so we had an idea about like a fashion.
What was your
Oh,
concept?
sorry. Reusing and remixing. So there's like a fashion remix idea where like, well, I know a lot of my students already do this, where they are on Instagram, they follow style bloggers or whatever, they collect pictures of outfits that have like different pieces that they like, and then use those pieces to create a new outfit of their own. And I guess it would be the analogy of like Scratch, is if you take someone else's event block, use it in your own game or whatever that you're building, and then modify it.
Right.
Yeah, it's like they have a character that jumps, but you have like a star,
Yeah.
and you want your star to jump, right? So it's like a blouse that's red instead of blue or whatever.
And I remember we were also saying, like, how then do you give credit to someone on Instagram? You shout them out as like, style tips from so-and-so, and you can do that in Scratch, you can do that in Python. So we can see that there are tons of connections that are forged when we think about what do the students bring with them to the class, whether that's their language ability in the case of bilingual students or any of these other examples that you're bringing up. And we hope that this leads to some new activities you might do in your class to introduce these concepts. So as our last thing we want to do, we want to know, because we're developing these ideas to also bring to a larger group, which we'll talk about in a minute in terms of people thinking about bilingualism in computer science. But how useful did you find translanguaging as a lens for viewing either transition between program languages or teaching of these computational skills? Was it useful? Yeah.
So one of the things I think is particularly useful about it is like making something that people don't traditionally see as an asset, and I could see going to my class and saying, okay, so who here speaks more than one language, and how do you do that translation? And that's what we're going to be doing today. So like empowering people who are generally not giving that empowerment.
Yeah.
I actually kind of used this without really thinking about it in my class the other day, because my co-teacher and I actually asked our girls at the beginning of our session, like, you guys teach us some slang just to start off class, and then we're going to try to figure out how to use that. Because they're using those words anyways, and we have no idea what they're talking about. But like, then I love the Trey Songz example, because that's an excellent way to describe, unstable versus stable atoms, like chill versus no chill. I love that. And yeah, as a teacher, you could definitely figure that out if you have them teach it to you.
Right. If you know their resources
Yeah.
and make the connection. Anybody else? How useful? Yeah.
Oh, this was extremely useful to me. I work for the Codesters platform, and we're looking at, like, we definitely want to have other languages available, but we know it's not just about translating the directions, and I really want to create something that's a rich experience for as many students as possible, that's not just like, oh, and by the way, you could read the directions in Spanish and Russian and Chinese or whatever. So this has been a great starting point.
Great, because we know that even when students come in with different languages they speak at home, they're not necessarily balanced bilinguals. They're not going to come in knowing all the academic terms in Russian to be able to understand a translation. So how do we go with what they know?
And that doesn't necessarily, reading the directions that way wouldn't necessarily help you actually complete the programming or learn the computational concept.
Right. Great. What would make this activity stronger from your perspective? Think on it. You don't have to have answers right away.
We'll share our email afterwards as well, so if you want to send us some ideas, definitely do that.
And then lastly, so we are planning to bring together a group of educators, people who think about bilingualism, people who think about computer science, to brainstorm around bilingualism in computer science. And because we really want this to be part of the, CS for all. All means the 41% of students in our system who are emergent bilinguals. So we want to put that kind of in the center of the CS for all agenda. We want to have meetings with teachers who work with these populations to inform the policy that's coming down the line. So if you are interested in this, we're going to be collecting people's, oh, there it is, at this link. If you could go here and just put your name down and your email address, and we will get in touch with you so that you can join us at that meetup, which will probably be sometime in April.
Yeah, and part of that is identifying any resources that you're currently using, right? As well as other challenges perhaps that we're having, and just anything that we're really excited about pushing that the pedagogy as well as the field, right? In addressing multiple audiences, and so definitely let us sign up and let us know. We'd love to check in.
I can't get to it.
I don't know if it's working.
Oh, maybe put it on that link page that
Yeah,
Sean
the-
has.
Yeah, I'll put it on the link page. So this is.
I don't know if the link is
Make sure that
Is
counts.
this,
Or
this
maybe,
is-
is it shared with everybody?
This is case sensitive as well, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Oh, this is,
because it's
You can't tell.
Oh, you
because-
can
Yeah.
tell the font.
There we go.
That's
That's an example of translanguage notes.
That's computer science.
Computer
There it is.
Right.
I love, yeah.
Okay.
I love the comment about using different fonts as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, this font
That
will
was
probably not do
really-
well with a lot of students.
I love that. I think it's yeah.
Can you put that link though on the?
Yes, we'll definitely put it on that shared document for folks as well.
And we'll keep you aware of when that meeting is going to be. I think it's going to be really valuable because I felt when I was teaching students who are emergent bilinguals, I was making stuff up for them.
Yeah.
And making stuff up that was going to draw on their backgrounds, and then realizing, are there other teachers who are doing this? Like, can we work together?
Well, I also want to kind of talk about teacher training, and I'm trying very hard to recruit more bilingual teachers, but it won't always match up, you know.
Right.
And like I, being a multicultural person, am used to code switching, but if you don't have that background, it's a foreign concept to you.
Right.
Then where do you start?
Right.
You know that.
Right. And so we'll talk through maybe some of those resources that other people are using. I work with a lot of teachers who don't speak the languages of their students and can also talk after if you want. But at this event, we'll have lots of people sharing strategies. All right. So that was it.
That was it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
for joining us.
Very much.